Hello, BookTube. Some of you may have seen on Olive's channel, a Book Olive, that she has made an announcement for one of the greatest events on BookTube, Nonfiction November, right around the corner. In that video, she describes the sweep of this event. It's all over social media. It's on almost every platform, Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. There's even a new app. I'll leave a link to her video down below, in which, among other things, while she's talking about Nonfiction November, she describes the challenges that she has thought up for this year. They're as good as they are every year. The goal of Nonfiction November being to get you to read nonfiction, either some if you read none, or more if you read some. And to combat the negative impression that nonfiction tends to have, even in the reading community, of being dull or tedious or intimidating. As Olive points out in her video and has pointed out for years, as I've tried to point out for years, that just means you're reading the wrong nonfiction for you. That's all. It's an infinite variety, and there's plenty of it that will thrill you, absolutely thrill you. I myself believe, although it's not a contest, that the more of a bug for nonfiction you get, the less satisfying most fiction feels. And in her video, Olive mentions that she will soon be making a TBR video of her own for what she plans to do and give you some possibilities for hitting those challenges in November. I want to do that same thing, a version of it, in this video, but it's a little different for me because I have set a sort of a bailiwick for myself in my reading. We all have shapes that we intentionally impose on our reading, even mood readers do. And mine has been for years and years and years to read the new releases in the American book market from major publishing houses in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me, and to read as many of those as I possibly can, as opposed to the many dedicated, especially critics that I know, who only read one thing. Let's say they read history, just broadly read, they read history. And yet, at the end of the year, any year, their main reaction is lamentation because they haven't read even a fraction of all the history that came out from the mainstream houses, let alone kept up on anything else. I don't like that feeling, and I work hard against it every year, hopelessly, of course. Far more books come out in all the categories that I'm talking about than I could possibly read, but I still try. I think I probably make a more legitimate attempt, a bigger attempt, than most other readers do, certainly most other critics do. So every month for me has a nonfiction TBR. I thought I would go through a TBR for some of the major stuff that I am going to be reading in November or that I've already read but that has a November publication date. A lot of this stuff has shown up on this channel before. But here it'll all be in one place. And keep in mind, when I described that bailiwick, I did not say all the books coming out in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me that look good. No, I didn't say that because I don't impose that. Not only because I might miss something that is really good that didn't look good, but also because I view it as kind of my Irish beat cop responsibility to read the turds as well as the tulips. And that's germane because there are quite a few turds on this list. Now, there are books on the list that I'm going to show you now that I didn't particularly like. There are books on this list that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like unless they very much surprise me. But some books have surprised me in that way. And then there's another category. I've noticed it quite a bit in 2022. I don't know if it's specific to this year or I've just missed it in earlier years. I had to come up with a name for it. And I was reminded of the great old story in the world of science where a physicist looked at someone's calculations and said, this isn't right. This isn't even wrong. I've been reminded of that because I am well versed in assessing the good stuff that comes across my plate. And I'm also well able to assess the bad stuff that comes across my plate. The bad stuff being the stuff that tries and fails, the stuff that tries at something bad or unworthy, something evil, things like that. And in 2022, more than in any year that I can think of, I've had to acknowledge the existence of another category. And that category, I searched around for a highfalutin name, but the best name for it is junk. Stuff that isn't right and that isn't even wrong. Stuff that would be pointless to talk about critically. Because you know ahead of time that it is going to be completely devoid of content. It is all about the author. So it is going to be completely devoid of content. And what little stuff there is in it will be false or generated by other people under the so-called author's name, which is also false. So for my Nonfiction November TBR, I'm going to start with a block of junk and get that out of the way so that we can then talk about genuine books. These are not genuine books. They are, I don't even know what you would call them. Adjuncts of some sort of ongoing PR campaign? I have no idea. But we'll go through a block of junk. Stuff that I obviously am not going to be able to praise. I can't even condemn. It's like it doesn't really exist at all. But there's quite a few books that I want to show you here. We'll start with the first one. This is going to get reviewed everywhere, even though I maintain it will have, in fact, no content. And that is The Philosophy of Modern Song by, in heavy air quotes, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan can no more write a book than the sparrows on my porch can. But what difference does it make what's in this thing? No difference at all. It makes no difference what this book actually says, what anyone made it say. It has nothing could be less important than that. And I wish I could say that was the only piece of junk on this list, but oh my God, it's not. Fortunately, we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, but we have to get through the junk first. So let's just go through maybe 3 or 4 more pieces of junk, and then we'll move on to the books. The next one is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This is a hot air bubble that just sort of forms, floats for a bit, and then pops. No one remembers it, no one thinks of it, nothing distinguishes it from anything else. It didn't have any content to begin with. It effectively doesn't exist. This is the same example. So we have Dylan, that's junk. Another category, another entry in the junk category would be this, Cinema Speculation by Quentin Tarantino. This will get reviewed everywhere. Will anyone review the book? No. Is there anything in the book to be reviewed? No. No, there is not. This isn't even bad. Same thing with this next one. This is Novelist as a Vocation, Haruki Murakami. Did he have anything to do with this book? No. Does he know anything about it? No. Does he have anything interesting to say even if he did? No. Is any critic going to talk about this book as a book for its own content? No. So what is it? I have no idea what it is. No idea at all. Same thing with this next one. So Help Me God by former Vice President Mike Pence. The only thing that anyone wants to know about this evil public figure, this God-bothering, human-torturing, horrible figure, his record as his political record before he was Donald Trump's vice president was nothing less than horrifying in its depraved indifference to human life. But that doesn't matter. This book isn't going to be about that. It's not going to be honest or self-evaluating in any way. It wasn't written by Mike Pence. I'm sure that he didn't see more than a sentence or two of it. It will get talked about for one reason and one reason only, because Mike Pence was the first and only vice president in American history whose president sought to murder him. Donald Trump incited a violent armed mob to hunt down and kill Mike Pence, his sitting vice president. It's all there in public record. He hasn't been arraigned for it, hasn't been indicted for it. And Mike Pence, apparently, he doesn't hold it against him. That's the only thing that anybody's going to want to know about this book. It's going to come out as a warm air bubble over a stove. All anybody cares about for this is the 2 or 3 press release written lines about the violent insurrection on January 6th, Donald Trump's attempt to overthrow the government of this country, one vital part of which was to execute his vice president, who he said had let him down by not throwing out the election and installing him as president. Mike Pence said to Donald Trump, or not directly to him, but to the world, that he, on that day, simply acknowledged that he did not have the legal authority on the Constitution to do anything like that. That's all he did. But the noose that was brought to the Capitol, the weapons that were brought to the Capitol, the violent people who stormed the Capitol wanted to kill him. If they'd found him, they would have murdered him. And they came awful close to doing that. They came an arm length away from killing him. That's all anybody's going to care about for this book. It's not in any way a memoir. It's not in any way personal to the author. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Same thing with this next one. I promise, though, there aren't many. There are far more than I wish there were, but there aren't that many. Another one would be this thing. Whatever it is, I have no idea what this is. It's some sort of song-oriented book thing by Bono, who never saw it, never touched it, fingers never touched a keyboard, barely took the meetings, in which underlings wrote this thing, will go on tour maybe to a couple of friendly venues to ask him softball questions about the meaning of music, and might get reviewed. But there's nothing here. This isn't right. This isn't even wrong. It barely exists as a thing at all. I think let's just do one more. Okay, the next one is by Nick Hornby, the hipster's favorite. This is Dickens and Prince. A particular kind of genius. Nick Hornby, he has a lot to say about Prince. He doesn't know anything at all about Dickens. And what is this book? Does anyone care what its content is? No, they don't care at all. No one cares what the content is here. This is a soap bubble. It doesn't have any content. It doesn't have any substance. It isn't right. It isn't even wrong. It's just some sort of weird personality tour adjunct product that isn't really even a book. I'm sure that it will get written about, but for all the wrong reasons, barely any of which touch on anything in between its covers. For any of these things, I cannot for the life of me fathom why anyone would pay money for these things. I can't fathom why that would be true, and yet people will. So that is for November. I won't say read. There isn't any content in junk. I will experience these things. I will sample them as best I can. But there are books as well. We'll move on straight to those. Like this one. This is by John and Colleen Darnell. This is Egypt's Golden Couple. New book about Akhenaten and Nefertiti. I don't like the framing. The golden couple has connotations. I'm hoping those aren't pursued. I'm hoping this was just a publicist's idea for the title. I always like reading about ancient Egypt, so we shall see. This next one is by, it's edited by Susan Barber, and it is American Wildflowers, a literary field guide. So you go through the 20 or 30 famous American wildflowers, but not just in terms of their Linnaean classification and their distribution and whatnot, and their seasonality, but also in terms of literary snippets, places in the literature where they have been immortalized. I always love things like that, especially if they're done well. In terms of being done well, I'm putting off reading this book by a major figure in the American literary nonfiction landscape because I am so worried that it will be bad. This is And There Was Light. John Meacham's book about Abraham Lincoln. I've read only a small chunk of this, and the small chunk that I read confirmed my worst suspicions about what this will be, which is a book written solely for Morning Joe, written solely for Joe Scarborough. That kind of performative, dumb, stubborn American patriot. Performative because he knows what he's doing. He's not the idiot that he appears on his show. Instead, it's performative to condescend to Middle America, who you think is like that. Middle America is not like that at all, but he thinks that it is. So he will haul a guest onto his show, his poor guests, including often John Meacham, and he will say, well, he'll address a comment to them, and then just start talking himself. I'm just a country lawyer. It just seems to me, and the show will cut to commercial. In the middle of him going, I. And when they come back from commercial, he'll still be going, I. Well, the guest waits patiently to be given a nod to echo him in any way. that kind of ridiculous parochial school demonstration theater is as far away from a realistic biography as you could possibly get. And I worry that this will be that from front to back. Certainly the title is no encouragement. We shall see, though. Then also in November is a large array of things. I will be reading them all. I read them every year, and quite a few of them are nonfiction. The Best American series comes out in November. I have here Best American Science and Nature Writing, but there are all kinds of nonfiction stuff. It's not just Best American. This started off as Best American Short Stories. Forever and ever, it was only that. But then the Best American People realized that, very rightly and very, very happily, they realized that they could just branch that out, that it was a trusted name, and that they could branch that out to all sorts of categories. Science and nature is one, but there's essays and travel writing probably. There are all sorts of things in here. There's nothing on book reviewing, but I love these every year. I look forward to them. This next one is something that we've seen on this channel many times before. We saw an advanced copy, we saw a second advanced copy, and we saw a finished copy. And for all I know, next week we'll see a second finished copy. This is James Vincent's book, Beyond Measure, which studies and sort of celebrates the human propensity for measuring things and how central it is to history, how important an instrument it has been in oppression, but also in science and the advancement of comfort for everybody. I've been kicked quite a few times by books in the mail to read this thing. I haven't done it yet because I confess the subject strikes me as a little stultifying. What better time to overcome that reaction and dive into a book that looks boring than on Nonfiction November, which is all about overcoming that reaction. This next one we've also seen on this channel, Frank Decoter's China After Mao. The China story seems to be changing every week, but this is a sharp, really good analyzer of contemporary history. So anything he writes, I'm definitely going to want to read. This next one we've also seen on this channel a couple of times now. I haven't read it yet, but I have dipped my toe into it enough to know that the one element that was missing, is it well done? The idea is fascinating. The one element that was missing, I'm pretty sure is going to be okay. This is Michael Lamb's book, A Commonwealth of Hope, about how St. Augustine thought about earthly politics, about earthly kingdoms and cities, trying to refute the standard characterization that he hated them all, was appalled by them all, and wanted every Christian to focus their eyes on the other world, on heaven. This is meant to be a concerted challenge to that idea. Can't wait to dig into it. It will really require a lot of digging in because this is one of those books where I will be reading the book, but I will also be deeply reading the sources to see what's going on and how they're being used. This next one is Adam Rutherford. I think we've seen this on this channel. I don't have a finished copy yet, but I'll be reading this in November. This is Control, Adam Rutherford's new history of eugenics. Dark history, and I think he is going to draw a through line from eugenics popularity in the early part of the 20th century to its incorporation into Nazi fascism and probably Soviet fascism. I think he's probably going to make a strong case for that and probably interweave it with modern day scientific advancements. Eugenics is back in the public discussion and will get more so the more we are able to identify and even sometimes amend genetic defects in utero. It raises questions that are uncomfortable, and not just for Americans. I'm really hoping that this author doesn't draw too much of a one-to-one comparison, right? Eugenics was popular in the United States in the early part of the 20th century, but the United States in the early part of the 20th century is not responsible for Adolf Hitler trying to eliminate all the Jews of Europe. There's a gigantic leap there that cannot be laid at America's doorstep, no matter how fashionable that is to do. But if you were to ask a normal person, do you describe to them what eugenics is and then say, are you in favor of it? They'd say no. But wouldn't your reaction be a lot more nuanced if your doctor told you that your 2-month-old fetus, the 2-month-old baby that you're expecting, they now have determined has a severe genetic defect and they can correct it? Is there a single person in the world who would say, no, the severe genetic defect was there, I don't want you mucking around with my baby? Is there a single person who would say that? Surely every person in the world would say, no, go and fix it. Wouldn't they? And if they would, how close a cousin is that to the thinking that's going on in this book? Be interesting to find out. Again, it will all depend on the execution. Oh my, the tablet is reacting poorly. It probably is reacting to all of that junk I showed you. But I had a feeling that this was going to happen because this is a long list. But we'll try to keep it domesticated. This next one is by Daisy Hay. This was widely praised in the UK. It is now getting an American release in November. This is Dinner with Joseph Johnson. And this is about a London bookseller and publisher who, for 50 years, had guests at his dinner table on a regular basis. And they included some of the foremost thinkers, some of the foremost politicians, some of the foremost writers of his day. Eating talking, chatting, and also making history, germinating each other's ideas. This got the kind of praise in the UK that actually tempted me to buy a UK edition. It's never been easier to do that, thanks to, Blackwell's, for instance, ships to America free of charge. Their international shipping is free, but also Book Depository has all kinds of these things, and they are slow, but they are fun. I didn't do it. I resisted. Instead, I will read this when it actually crosses my plate in November. But it's a fascinating subject when you consider that Johnson started those dinners in 1760. And 1760 plus 50 years allows you to encompass a lot. It allows you to encompass both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So it gives you a sense of what you can find there, of history being discussed at that table. And it's naturally a congenial subject for me because I have a long, long history of having friends over for the stereotypical wine and calzones. And those friends have often been editors, often writers, often other critics. I'm hoping that the convivial aspect of it is front and center in the book. This next one is by Beverly Gage. It will have no convivial aspects. This is G-Man, a big, fat new biography of J. Edgar Hoover. I always distrust subtitles like So-and-so and the Making of the American Century, but with Hoover, it might be justified. We shall see. The next one is also a biography. This is The Grand Affair. This is a new biography of John Singer Sargent, the great painter. I have read all of the other John Singer Sargent biographies, and I know the artist's work really well. I know it really well. I have known in my life 3 experts on John Singer Sargent, 2 biographers of him. I'm curious, therefore, to know what this book will do for me, while at the same time I acknowledge that I am not the normal reader of this book. The normal reader of this book will be interested in the time period, in Sargent's work. Maybe they've seen the Shaw Memorial here in Boston. But they won't have read everything there is to know. They won't have studied the individual works. They won't have done anything like that. So I will keep that in mind. I will pitch my reading for the general readership. Same thing is true with this next one. I know quite a bit about this subject. I liked this book, but I have my issues with it. I will look curiously to see if other critics have their issues with it. This is Kerry Greenridge's book, The Grimkes. And the Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, were born on a plantation in the South. They were born and raised in slave-owning society, and yet they became, in the East, firebrand abolitionists. Gave speeches in which, in some cases, just like with William Lloyd Garrison, their lives were in danger from the crowd gathered around the venue. Penguin Classics has a collection of their writings and speeches in their Black Spine Penguin Classic line. This book tells that story, tells the story of abolitionism at the time, but it broadens the scope of the Grimke sisters' story to include the Grimke brothers and all sorts of others. And the reason why you don't, in Grimke sisters' accounts, typically hear of Grimke brothers is because the brothers were products of slave rape. The black Grimkes, is what Kerry Greenridge calls them all throughout this book. There were others, and they led complicated lives. They went on to lead complicated lives, and the attitude of the sisters to them was complicated. That attitude is largely condemned by Kerry Greenridge. This is one of those modern biography/history books that is very much meant to dethrone people who have been admired for a century and a half. And I never quite know what to do with such books. I can never quite gauge the attitude. The Grimke sisters, okay, fine, had complicated, often invidious relations with their brothers and with their sisters and with the rest of their family, and very much would have objected to just a flat, casual reference to those people as family members. And maybe that had a lot to do with their slave background, their skin color, or whatnot. The Grimke sisters also did an enormous amount of good. And my first read-through of this book, I just read the advanced copy. I will wait and give it a serious read-through in the finished copy. My first read-through left me feeling a little wanting in estimating the good that they did. They did an enormous amount of good to change American attitudes towards the very bigotries they may have held themselves. So it's going to be fascinating. I'm hoping that this generates a lot of critical discussion. If any of you read it, I would be fascinated to know what you think. My own attitude on historical revisionism in the 21st century is fairly well known. I think, like a lot of things in the 21st century, it has been taken enormously too far. It is a very healthy and essentially healthy thing, but I think it's been taken way, way too far in a lot of instances, and in a mob-like way that I can in no way endorse, because no sooner endorse a mob than it turns on you. We shall see. I need to reevaluate this book very much when I read it again, when I read it pencil in hand with a finished copy. That's not unusual. I often reconsider a book in that way, so this will be one of them, but this will be one of the foremost ones. And as long as we're on the subject, we might as well do this next one. This is Fred Kaplan's new book, His Masterly Pen, which is a biography of Jefferson through his written works, as much as anything else. I mentioned before when I was talking about this book how bewildered I am at the choice of adjective here. I know it's a quote from a piece of writing, but any adjective would have been better than this, considering the subject at hand. But Jefferson was a beautiful writer, and I have been very pleased by literary biographies. I've also been very pleased by Fred Kaplan's work. His credit in The Bank of Steve could not be higher. So this will definitely be a book that I wrestle with in Nonfiction November. Same thing with this next one. This next one is first read through was lovely, but I want to get at some of its implications. This is Jonathan Lear's Imagining the End, Mourning, an Ethical Life. I like this. I thought it was lovely. I want to read it again. I definitely want to read it again before I write about it. Again, like the implication behind the Grimke Sisters book, same thing with this. There's an implication lurking behind this book that it hasn't quite freed itself from, that I wish it had, and maybe it did, and I just was looking for it, and so I saw it when it wasn't there. Too often in books about mourning, in hospice care, in end of life, mortality studies of any kind, too often in books like that, there is an absence of a note of finality. There's lurking in the background this kind of unshakable idea that what we're talking about here is painful, it is heartbreaking, it is life-ending and for the person and life-changing for the people who go through it. But, and there's no but. There is no but. There is no but. The person isn't going anywhere. They're dying. They're dissolving into their component parts. They are not going anywhere. They are not going anywhere. They're ending. And often books like this, even when they claim to be non-religious, atheistic, agnostic, often that assumption is just baked into a lot. And maybe that's natural. Maybe that's unavoidable. Maybe the human condition makes that unavoidable. It nags at me because it's not true mourning if you think the person is somewhere. But anyway, we'll just move on to Into the Great Emptiness. This is Peril and Survival on the Greenland Ice Cap by David Roberts. Classic extreme adventure story. I've read it and really liked it. I read it with a little bit of background mourning. I used to use that term in a different context because your children will live in a world that does not have a Greenland ice cap. This is a huge amount of toil and epic descriptions of natural beauty and hardship and danger in a world that is completely temporary. It will be gone in virtually no time. And someone will make this journey. Someone could reprise this journey in 50 years, and it would be completely different. It would be like it was a book about a different part of Earth. It was hard not to have that in mind when I was reading this. I'm looking forward to rereading. I thought it was done with a great deal of gusto. And oh my, when we're talking about a great deal of gusto, this is another book that got widely praised in the UK and is now getting a US release. This is by Ray Perman, and it is James Hutton, The Genius of Time, about an Enlightenment Scottish geologist and botanist and doctor, and polymath of all kinds, friend to all the other greats of the Scottish Enlightenment, and a hoot, a real character. The author of this book says that James Hutton was someone who could create a merry party in an empty room. That's how effervescent he was. So this is going to be a case very much so where the personality of the person involved, like the Johnson book, is part of the story, not just, you know, a little detail that's in on a couple of pages. Great, looking forward to it. You have geological levels there because Hutton was in many ways the father of our concepts of geology. Can't wait to give it a try. Can't wait to read the physical copy. Then we have a Steve book. In every month, the nonfiction releases in the mainstream market will include some Steve books. There are always some Steve books. I read all of these things and love them, but there are some that are much more keyed to my own interests. And this is one of them. I think we saw this on this channel. This is Mark Selverstone's book, The Kennedy Withdrawal, examining the attitudes of John F. Kennedy's administration towards Vietnam, and apparently having some contentious things to say about typical readings of that attitude. I have this. I haven't read it yet. I've been putting it off and putting it off. Kennedy books have a strong penchant for displeasing me because they have a strong penchant for being dumb. I don't think this one will be. The feeling that I get is that it's not. And again, I have to remind myself, as with a couple of other books on this list, that it isn't, the book isn't dumb if it's not in-depth enough for me. I have to remember that because part of why I read these new releases is for you. It's for the public. It's not for just myself. I know the subject, this particular subject, much, much better than most people do. I know it much better than most of its own historians do. That's not most readers. I have to just keep that in mind. It could not address me at the level that I want it to and still be very, very good. I will keep that in mind and report back. This next one we've seen on this channel a few times now. It's unavoidable, much like the John Meacham. This is a major, currently working historian. So there's no way to avoid the book. And I wouldn't want to avoid it. I'm worried that it's going to irritate me. that a detailed pencil-in-hand reading of the final copy will really annoy me. This is H.W. Brand's. This is his book, The Last Campaign, which follows General William Tecumseh Sherman after the Civil War when he was tasked by the U.S. government with exterminating the native inhabitants of this country. They clothed it in a lot of flowery language about relocating, about tempering, about educating, about Christianizing. But you don't ask William Sherman to do any of those things. You ask him to destroy. And I don't get the impression that this book is going to give that impression. I don't get the impression that this book is going to condemn where it should be condemned. Now, I just said earlier that I'm not a big fan of 21st century historical revisionism. But the nature of William Tecumseh Sherman in war, both in the Civil War and afterwards in his war against Native Americans, has been patently obvious from the facts all along. The hero worship that he received when he received it was wrong. It was racist or cultural, or tribal. It was wrong when it happened. Whereas the praise that the Grimke Sisters got from other abolitionists for their work in changing minds in the American Northeast wasn't false. That wasn't wrong. They did that work at risk of their own lives. Dethroning them because they were jerks to their brothers seems to me to be much closer to the kind of 21st century historical revisionism for revisionist sake that I don't like. Whereas this, I'm worried this is going to go in the opposite direction. That this is going to be, I mean, what is the title? Campaign. That's The Last Campaign. The Last Campaign isn't as good as the Second Genocide. And I worry that that's what was done here, and I worry that it was done for the same reasons as the Lincoln book, so that you are palatable to Morning Joe, so that you're palatable to the news shows where you talk about a hardened old soldier and, you know, a few more enemies in the field, and if only he had our modern day sensibilities. He had our modern day sensibilities. He discarded them, and so did his government. We shall see. I'm worried about the kind of press that this will get, but I could be pleasantly surprised. This next one is by Dorta Nors. It's translated by Carolyn Waite. I'm not sure translated from what. And it's A Line in the World, a year on the North Sea coast. I know the North Sea very well, and it is evocative but bleak in a lot of places. It is evocative, but bleak. It is a harsh and beautiful place. This could be excellent nature writing. I'm curious to know. I haven't seen a physical copy of this yet. I'm wondering, since that's an original illustration on the cover, I'm wondering if this thing is illustrated throughout. Any of you who are in the UK, I think this has been out in the UK for quite some time now, a few months at least. And I'm wondering, maybe you know, is it illustrated? I'd love to know. Although that might not be dispositive. It might not. The illustrations might not be in the US edition. The next one is huge. I think it's very expensive. So if it's a Thames and Hudson product, and they do a lot of stuff that is affordable, but they do a lot of stuff that isn't, and it's still valuable. This is Love, Lucian, the letters of Lucian Freud. From the early part of his life, his boyhood, all the way to the doorstep of his fame, the time in the 1940s and 1950s when it was obvious that he was going to be a universally renowned painter. That was no longer in doubt. And Lucian Freud, for the whole of his life, wrote antic, very energetic letters to all sorts of people and illustrated them. And this volume is, I think, slightly oversized and has all of those illustrations. It's authorized by the Freud estate, so you get facsimiles of the illustrations. That in itself makes this fascinating, valuable. I don't think a lot of those illustrations have ever seen the light of day before. It's just a question of whether or not you are a Lucian Freud completist or not, because I think it's going to be pricey. Then we have Israel Noel's book, The Messiah Confrontation. We've seen this before on this channel. I got the advanced copy and the finished copy. This is his book about a reinterpretation of the temple politics infighting behind the execution of Jesus Christ. Haven't read it yet. I mean to do it this weekend. I just haven't got around to it. But it is a November release. All of these things are November releases, just fine for Nonfiction November if you're interested in them. You could get them. You're 3 weeks out now. You could get your library to request them. Request it from your library if they don't already have a copy on order, or if they do, get on the waiting list for it. Maybe first in line on the waiting list. This next one is by Anthony Everett, also with a co-writer, Roddy Ashworth, and it is a new biography of Nero, the Roman Emperor Nero. I haven't touched this. I'm once again worried about 21st century revisionism, which doesn't only want to knock saints off their pedestals, it also wants to put monsters on pedestals. It wants to do both. It's this unsettled attitude in the 21st century that if someone tells you that something is true, then it isn't. Or if you want something to be true, just declare it that way, preferably with tons and tons of obscenities, and then it will be true. I'm thinking that this is probably an attempt to resuscitate the reputation of the Emperor Nero. to say he wasn't as bad as all that. And there is lots of historical precedents to say that. I'll just be interested in what kind of a meaty job it is, that's all. Same thing is true with this next one, How Much Meat is on the Bone. This is William Indebonen's book, The Peacemaker, about Ronald Reagan and the end of the Cold War. Reagan books fall very distinctly into two camps. They are either really dumb or really good. There's almost nothing that I've seen that's in between. The really dumb ones very much want to appeal, again, to the Morning Joe crowd. They want tub thumping instead of acute thought. They want someone to go on and just get misty-eyed. Right away, get misty-eyed and sort of wax instead of talking, instead of thinking. Always distrust someone who would rather wax than think. and so naturally my hackles are up for this. I'm wary going into it that that's what it will be like. We shall see. Every once in a while, a Reagan book comes along that pleases me. This next one is Ian Kershaw. A lot of you will know Ian Kershaw as biographer of Hitler. This is his book, Personality and Power, coming out in November, a series of historical profiles. Oftentimes, a book like this, it's a standard thing for biographers and historians to write a book like this. Oftentimes, those books can be very disappointing. I have a whole shelf of versions of this going back 70 years. It's a familiar gambit, but ordinarily, the strain shows. Ordinarily, these kinds of books come from someone who has made himself a huge specialist on one or maybe two people, but not 12. Not 20, and it starts to the Wikipedia aspect of it starts to show. We'll see if that's the case here. I haven't actually read it. This next one I have read. I really enjoyed it. This is Sean Bethel's book, Remainders of the Day. The next new thing. This comes out in November. It's the next installment in his series of books about running a bookshop. And at first, the frankness of it, of the earlier volumes in this run of books, kind of bugged me, but I've come to love it. So I thought this was just totally enjoyable. I think you will enjoy it too, even if you're not interested in what happens in a bookstore. I think it will still generate a lot of book suggestions that you'll want to follow up on. Well, this next one is by Joseph Sassoon, and it is his book on the Sassoon family. The first 50 years of their financial dominance and all kinds of intertwinings between that financial dominance and the governments around them, both the governments that expelled the family at the beginning of the story here, and then the governments that embraced the family and why they did. I haven't read more than a tiny sampling of this thing. It seems like it's fairly frank. It seems like it will not be family apologetics, and that's good. That would make it useless. This next one is by Brigida Olabas. I think we've seen this on this channel before. This is a big fat biography coming out in November. A biography of Shirley Hazard, the writer Shirley Hazard, who does not have enough readers today, despite the existence of a very pretty collection of short stories just a few years ago. I think we saw that on this channel just a few years ago in some mail haul or other. I don't know if this is the only Shirley Hazard biography, but it'll be the only one that I've ever read. And I'm looking forward to it in November. November tends to be a season for big fat biographies. Writer biography is always a special challenge, but I'll take that challenge. Then we have a book we've seen on this channel before. This is Douglas Brinkley's new book, The Silent Spring Revolution, which is about Rachel Carson and her amazing book, Silent Spring, and the seismic effect that it had on government. There was a time when everyone in the country was reading that book and taking some serious lessons from it. It was, among other things, a huge wake-up call that the natural world is not invulnerable, that it's directly affected by human activity, and we should be careful about that. I haven't read more than a tiny toe dip in this. One aspect of it that I think I'm going to like is that I think Brinkley's going to spend, appropriately enough, but not inevitably, a huge amount of time on Rachel Carson herself. That would be great. We shall see. This next one is a book that I'm going to argue with, I'm pretty sure. This is James Rickard's. This is Sold Out: How Broken Supply Chains, Surging Inflation, and Political Instability Will Sink the Global Economy. So, a doomsaying book. But is it a Chicken Little book? That's my question. I read about this book, and again, I dipped my toe into a little bit of it. I think on the face of it, the contention in the subtitle is wrong. It's not that the global economy, the convenience of the global economy, of global supply chains, it's not like that's a happy little side effect that we all get to marginally, by the way, enjoy while other factors work out on the main stage in world history. It's that people want that specific thing. They want that convenience, that specific convenience. And they will roll over most of the obstacles to it if those obstacles become severe. I think that is probably why there hasn't been any World War II style war since World War II. I think a lot of the modern world is expecting global supply chains. And that, I think, is part of the reason for the psychotic reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. Be very interested in reading this. I love it. I actually love it when I go into a book spoiling for a fight, because I don't let that close my mind. The book could still convince me. This next one, this is going to be a treat for Nonfiction November, a pure treat. This is by John Carey, and it is Sunday Best. It's a big collection of his book reviews. He is a great book reviewer. I have collections of his. I've followed his reviews for decades. I hope that this has lots of stuff in it that I've never seen, but it doesn't matter. Even if by some weird chance it was full of things that I've already seen, they'll all be in one book. I'll be able to annotate them. So this is mainly on this list for me. I'm not expecting many of you to be interested in this, but this is it's a pure sweet spot, as Steve book as Steve books get, because it's my profession. Then we have another book on ancient Egypt. This is by Toby Wilkinson, who did a couple of books on ancient Egypt that you might know and might have liked. We've seen this on this channel. This is Tutankhamun's Trumpet, where he looks at what the ancient Egyptians buried in their tombs and what King Tut buried in his tomb, and what that can tell us about him, his court, his specific time period, and also his broader society, their religious beliefs, their social customs, what they did when they were alive, what they thought they were going to do when they were dead. I have an advanced copy of this, and I'm the author's credit in the Bank of Steve could not be higher, so I'm looking forward to it. We have oh goodness, we're almost done here. In fact, let's stop with this one. This has gone on a long time. This is also something we've seen on this channel before. This is Josiah Osgood's new book, Uncommon Wrath. The subtitle of which says that the rivalry between Cicero and Cato and Caesar destroyed the Roman Republic. I haven't seen this yet, so I haven't dipped my toe into it at all, but that subtitle is wrong. Julius Caesar destroyed the Roman Republic. Cato could have died in his crib, and Julius Caesar would still have done that. Certainly their rivalry and the rivalry of a few other people makes the end of the Roman Republic interesting as a narrative. We'll see how much of that is involved here. Again, Roman history is a type of thing, like with that Nero book, where it can either be respectful of its readers' intelligence, or it can be just bone-jarringly dull, dumb, stupid, one-dimensional. Not junk. No matter what, it won't be junk. But still, I'm sorry that I started all this off with junk, but there you go. Those are a few nonfiction possibilities for your Nonfiction November. I will leave a link to Olive's video down below, but I'm looking forward to it. Of course, new releases will not be the only nonfiction that I read. I will have another TBR for you of more TBR BY, a list of suggestions for you for nonfiction. Maybe I'll even tie it to the prompts. That might be fun. I'm sure that there's a way. The prompts are so general that I'm sure there's a way that I could tie every one of them to every one of these books. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. This has gone on quite long enough. You get me talking about nonfiction, that will happen.